Balak, the king of Moab, heard that the Jewish people were coming. He understood that he and his nation would be thrown out of the land. They hired Bilam, the Gentile prophet, to curse the Jewish nation. Bilam, in place of cursing the Jewish nation, actually gave them a bracha, Matovu Olecha Yaakov. At which point Balak furiously turns to Bilam and says, "What have you done?" Bilam says, "What can I do? I can do nothing other than what Hashem tells me to do." Bilam says to Balak, "However, I will give you a piece of advice. If you wish to destroy the Jewish nation, get them to sin." At which point Balak takes the Benos Moab, the young women of Moab, tells them to go seduce the Jewish men, and in fact they were somewhat successful. Apparently many Jewish men succumbed. They first joined these Moabite women, and then they later served Baal Peor. Because of this, a Magefa, a plague, broke out, and 24,000 Jews were in the process of dying. At a certain point, at the absolute low point, Zimri takes a Moabite princess, brings her into the encampment of the Jews, and publicly performs a sin. Pinchas recognizes the gravity of the situation. He goes running to Moshe. "Moshe, what should we do?" Moshe tells him, "Kanoim Pogimbo, you are allowed to kill him." At the risk of his life, Pinchas runs into the Shevet, pretends that he's joining the group, miraculously enters the tent, in one fell swoop kills both Zimri and the Moabite women, picks up both bodies, throws them dead on the floor. No sooner do the bodies touch the floor than that plague stops. 24,000 people died, but it stopped at that point. Clearly, Pinchas was a hero. Yet Rashi explains to us that the very next Parsha, Pinchas, opens up with the pasuk, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. Why is it that Parshas Pinchas delineates the lineage of Pinchas? Says Rashi, because people were being mavazeh him. People were mocking him. Look at this fellow. His grandfather fattened up idols. His grandfather fattened up various calves to be fed to idols, and he kills a Rosh Shevet. He kills Zimri. Says the Torah, he was correct. Forget Yisro, don't forget his other lineage. He's Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen. He was justified. He was correct. This Rashi is quite difficult to understand, because it seems that some people were mocking him as if to say Pinchas was wrong. They were making fun of him as if to say what he did was inappropriate. Yet it's clear and obvious to us and to anyone reading the Torah that he was a hero. How could they have made such a grave mistake? And I believe the answer to this question is predicated on understanding that history has a tremendous clarifying effect. When we look 50 years after the fact, 100 years after the fact, it's very clear to see who the good guys were, who the bad guys were. The good guys come riding in on shining horses, white with all crystal clarity. The bad guys are wearing black. It's very clear who's good, who's bad, evil, and goodness is clear for all to see. But that's with the perspective of history. When you're living in the times, when you're in the thick and thin of things, it's not so obvious. There was a cheshbon, there was a logic to what Zimri did. Why allow the Moabite women to take the Jewish men away and then cause them to more easily serve idols? Bring the Moabite women here. Granted, it'll be one sin, but it won't lead to idol worship. It was a mistake. It was a miscalculation, but there was a logic. And the point being, to us now, we may understand it as false, but to the people living then, it wasn't so simple. As clear as it is to us that Pinchas was the hero, to the people then it wasn't so clear. Because when you're in the thick and thin of things, it's very difficult to understand. It's very difficult to have that clarity that a historical perspective provides. And I believe this concept is very key and fundamental. When we look back on previous generations, it's very difficult for us to understand their nisyonos. What was the challenge in the 1920s? The fight was about keeping Shabbos and Kashrus. That's easy for us. What was the challenge in the medieval times? Those things were simply things we would never do, right? That is true based on our perspective, in our social climate, in our times. But those weren't the winds that blew then, and it wasn't the times then. And just as we have difficulty understanding previous generations, I believe future generations will have difficulty understanding our situations. Such wealth, such availability, and you have no time. You have so many time-saving devices, so many labor-saving devices, and you don't have time to learn, to daven, to spend time with your children. the reality is that a historical perspective, removing ourselves from the thick and thin of things and looking at the way we live, oftentimes offers us a tremendous insight and understanding the forces that happen.